My son packed my belongings into 2 boxes while I was at the doctor's appointment. I came home that afternoon to find everything I owned sitting by the front door. My clothes, my photographs, my mother's old sewing machine that I had kept for 40 years. All of it packed away, neatly into cardboard boxes, as if I was something that needed to be tidied up and moved along. My daughter-in-law was standing in the kitchen when I walked in. She did not look at me directly. She was wiping down a counter that did not need wiping. My son came down the stairs a moment later. He could not look at me either. He said, "Ma'am, we think it would be better if you found your own place." I was 67 years old. I had lived in that house for 22 years. I had raised him in that house. I had nursed his father in that house during the cancer that eventually took him. I had kept that house running through every difficult season of our family's life. And in the space of one afternoon, while I was sitting in a waiting room having my blood pressure checked, my son had decided I no longer belonged in it. My name is Eleanor. I am 69 years old now. I live in Sheffield, and I am going to tell you everything that happened in the 2 years since that afternoon, because I think there are other mothers out there who need to hear that what happened to me does not have to be the end of the story. I want to start by telling you about Michael as a boy, because the man who packed my boxers that afternoon was not the boy I raised, and I think understanding the distance between those 2 people is important to everything that follows. Michael was a gentle child, sensitive in a way that worried his father sometimes. David always wanted him to be tougher, more confident, less easily affected by things. I never agreed with that worry. I thought Michael's sensitivity was one of his finest qualities. He noticed when other children were left out. He cried at films that did not particularly call for crying. He wrote me cards for no occasion at all, just because he had a thought he wanted to put into words. When David got sick, pancreatic cancer, the kind that does not leave room for much hope once it is found, Michael was 19 years old and home from university for what was supposed to be a few weeks and ended up being the better part of a year. He sat with his father through some of the hardest nights of all our lives. He learned how to help me lift him. He learned how to manage medications. He learned, far too young, what it looks like when someone you love is disappearing in front of you. David died in March. Michael went back to university in September, 6 months later than planned. And he graduated 2 years after that with a degree he had nearly abandoned twice. I tell you all of this because I want you to understand that the boy who sat with his dying father through that year was not someone who lacked capacity for love or loyalty. He had both of those things in abundance. What happened later did not happen because Michael was incapable of those qualities. It happened because of Claire. I met Claire properly about 18 months before Michael and I parted ways. They had been together for over 2 years by then, and I had met her at family gatherings, holidays, the ordinary occasions where you get to know someone who is becoming important in your child's life. My early impressions of her were not unkind. She was intelligent. She was ambitious in a way I respected. She had strong opinions about most things, which I did not see as a flaw. I have strong opinions myself, and I do not think women should apologize for having them. What I noticed, slowly and then more clearly, was the way she positioned herself in relation to me. It started small. Comments about how things were done in her own family, framed as simply different rather than critical, but always landing in a way that made our family's habits seem somehow less correct. The way she would redirect conversations when I was speaking, not rudely, but consistently, so that Michael's attention would shift to her almost without him noticing it happening. I told myself I was being an oversensitive mother-in-law to be. I told myself this was simply the natural adjustment of a son building a life with someone new, and that my job was to make space for that, not to resent it. I made a great deal of space. Looking back, I made too much. They married 2 years after I met her. It was a beautiful wedding. I cried, genuinely and happily. Watching my son commit himself to someone he so clearly loved, I gave a speech at the reception about the kind of boy he had been and the kind of man he had become. And Claire hugged me afterward and told me it had moved her to tears. I believed, in that moment, that whatever distance I had sensed building was simply my own insecurity. I believed we were entering a new and good chapter. The first year of their marriage, the visits became less frequent. Sunday dinners that had once been a fixed and unquestioned ritual became occasional, then rare. When I asked Michael about it directly, gently, I want to stress, I was never accusatory in those early conversations. He would say that they were busy, that Claire's work was demanding, that things would settle once they found their rhythm as a married couple. I accepted those explanations because I wanted them to be true. What I did not know, what I would only piece together much later through fragments and through one very honest conversation with Michael's oldest friend, was that Claire had been having a sustained and deliberate conversation with my son about me. Not occasional complaints. A sustained narrative, built carefully over many months, about how I was overly involved in his life, about how I had never fully let him become independent, about how our closeness, the very closeness that had carried him through his father's death, was somehow a sign of dysfunction rather than love. I do not say this to suggest Claire is a villain in some simple, cartoonish sense. I have had 2 years to think about this, and I no longer believe the world divides cleanly into villains and victims. I believe Claire was, and possibly still is, a deeply insecure person who needed her marriage to feel like the most important relationship in Michael's life, without exception, without competition, without any other claim on his loyalty existing alongside it. I do not think she set out maliciously to destroy my relationship with my son. I think she could not tolerate sharing him. And she found, gradually, the language and the leverage to ensure she did not have to. The diagnosis came in the 2nd year of their marriage. Not for me, for Claire's mother, who lived 2 hours away and had always had a complicated, somewhat distant relationship with Claire. Claire's mother was diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's, and almost overnight, the conversation in their household shifted to caregiving, to obligation, to the particular intensity that comes when a family confronts a parent's decline. I understood this completely. I had lived it with David. I reached out to Claire directly, which I had rarely done before, and told her that I understood what she was facing, and that I was there if she ever wanted to talk. To someone who had been through something similar, she thanked me. It felt, briefly, like a bridge being built. I did not realize, until much later, that what was actually happening was something closer to displacement. Claire's anxiety about her own mother's decline seemed to sharpen, rather than soften, her feelings about my presence in Michael's life. I have wondered since whether watching her own mother become increasingly dependent, increasingly present as a need rather than a person, triggered something in her about what an aging parent's claim on a child's time and attention could become. Whether she looked at her own situation and decided, consciously or not, that she could not manage to demanding parental relationships, and that mine was the one she had more power to remove. I am speculating. I want to be honest about that. I do not know Claire's internal world. I only know what happened. What happened was this. The conversations between Michael and me became shorter and more strained. He started prefacing visits with conditions. Could I not stay too long? Could I call before coming rather than simply arriving? Could I perhaps not mention certain things in front of Claire? Things that had never been sensitive before. I felt myself shrinking, piece by piece, into a smaller and more cautious version of the mother I had been. The final months before they asked me to leave were marked by a specific kind of cruelty that I find difficult to describe even now. Because it was so quiet, Claire began referring to incidents from years ago, moments when I had, by her account, overstepped or interfered in presenting them to Michael as evidence of a pattern. Some of these incidents I remembered very differently. Some I did not remember at all, and I wondered if they had happened the way she described them or if they had been shaped over retellings into something they had not originally been. I want to be honest that there may have been times I overstepped. I am not claiming to have been a perfect mother-in-law. I likely offered opinions that were not asked for. I likely held on, at times, more tightly than I should have. Especially in the years immediately after David died, when Michael was the only family I had left in any meaningful daily sense. I do not think I was a monster, but I do not think I was without fault either. What I do not accept, even now, is that whatever faults I had justified, what came next. The afternoon I came home to find my things in boxers, Michael told me, standing in the kitchen with his eyes fixed somewhere just past my shoulder, that he and Claire needed space to build their own life, that my presence in the house had become a source of tension between them, and that he thought he used the word thought, as though this had been a careful, considered decision rather than something he had clearly been pushed toward, that it would be healthier for everyone if I found somewhere else to live. I asked him directly whether this was his decision or Claire's. He said it was theirs together. I knew, in the silence that followed that sentence, that it was not. I will not pretend the months after that were anything other than devastating. I was 67 years old, recently widowed in the longer arc of my life even. If it had been some years since David's death, and I was, for the first time since I was a young woman, entirely alone, I moved into a small rented flat across the city. I cried more in those first 3 months than I had cried since David's funeral. I questioned everything, my own judgment, my own worth as a mother, whether the love I thought I had given my son had actually been some kind of burden I had failed to recognize as such. My sister, Margaret, was the one who pulled me back from the worst of that period. She had never liked Claire, had said so plainly on more than one occasion before any of this happened, and she did not waste time now telling me I had done something wrong. She simply showed up. She helped me find the flat. She helped me unpack the same boxes Michael had packed, and there was something both painful and oddly healing about her hands. Going through my mother's sewing machine, my old photographs, the small accumulated evidence of an entire life, and finding a place for each of them in a new home that was entirely my own. I want to tell you what I did with that year, because I think it matters more than the betrayal itself. I did not spend it waiting for Michael to call. I want to be honest that I wanted him to call every single day, and there were nights I sat by my phone in a way that embarrasses me a little to admit even now, but I made a decision, somewhere around month 4, that I was not going to build my remaining years around a door that might never open again. I joined a walking group through my local community center. I had not made a new friend in over a decade, and within that first year I had made 4. I started volunteering 2 mornings a week at a literacy program, helping adults who had never learned to read properly work through their first full books. I cannot tell you what that did for me. There is something about helping a sick man sound out his first complete sentence that puts a son's silence into a different kind of perspective. I started writing again, something I had not done since I was a young woman, before marriage and motherhood absorbed every spare hour I had. I wrote about David. I wrote about Michael as a boy. I wrote, eventually, about everything that had happened, in a notebook I never intended anyone else to read, simply because I needed somewhere to put it that was not my own chest. 14 months after I left that house, Michael called me. I almost did not recognize his voice at first, not because it had changed, but because I had spent so long not expecting to hear it. He said he had been thinking about his father. He said it was coming up on the anniversary, and he had found himself wanting to talk to someone who remembered David the way he did. And there was no one else in the world who could do that the way I could. We met for coffee 2 days later. It was awkward in the way that meetings are awkward when too much unspoken history sits between two people who used to share everything. He did not apologize that day, not properly, not in the way I think he eventually came to understand he owed me. But it was a beginning. The fuller conversation came about 3 months after that. On a walk through a park near my flat, he told me that things had been difficult with Claire for a long time, that he had felt, for years, caught between two people he loved, who could not seem to coexist peacefully in his life, and that he had made a choice in that period that he now believed was wrong, even if he understood, at the time, why he had made it. He said he was sorry. I told him I appreciated hearing that, and I meant it. But I also told him something that I think surprised him. I told him that I needed more than an apology. I told him that if our relationship was going to exist again in any meaningful way, it could not exist on the same terms as before, where I quietly absorbed whatever arrangement made his life easiest. I told him I had built a life in his absence, a genuinely good one, and that I was not interested in becoming, once again, a problem to be managed around the edges of someone else's comfort. I do not know if that conversation would have meant anything to me. 18 months earlier, I think the version of myself who sat in that kitchen and watched her belongings disappear into boxes might have simply been grateful for any door opening at all, on any terms whatsoever. The woman who had spent a year building literacy programs and walking groups and a sewing room of her own in a small rented flat was a different person. I was willing to let him back in. I was not willing to disappear myself again to make that possible. Where things stand now, 2 years on, is complicated in the way that real reconciliation usually is. Michael and I see each other perhaps once a month, sometimes more. Claire and I have not properly repaired anything, and I have made peace with the likelihood that we may never have a warm relationship, only a civil one, conducted at a careful distance. For Michael's sake, I do not go to their house. We meet in neutral places, restaurants, parks, occasionally my flat when Claire is not present. It is not the relationship I once imagined having with my son in my later years. It is, however, a real one, built on terms I helped set, rather than terms simply imposed upon me. I think often about that 67-year-old woman walking into her own kitchen and finding her life packed into boxes. I think about how completely she believed, in that moment, that her worth as a mother, as a person, had been definitively decided by two people in another room. I want to say something directly to anyone listening to this who finds themselves in a similar room, facing a similar set of boxes. Whether those boxes are literal or simply the slow, quiet packing away of your place in someone's life, you are not finished. Whatever someone else has decided about your usefulness, you're welcome. Your right to take up space in a family you helped build, that decision belongs to them, and it does not have the final word on who you are or what your life can still become. I built an entire second life out of those boxes, not instead of my relationship with my son, but alongside the long, slow, uncertain process of seeing whether that relationship could be rebuilt on healthier ground. It could be it was. It is not what it once was, and I have grieved that difference more than once, quietly, in the privacy of my own home. But it is real, and it is honest, and it exists because I refused to let one afternoon, one set of cardboard boxes, one painful sentence in a kitchen, become the entire remaining story of my life. If you take nothing else from what I have told you, take this: people who decide you are disposable are not always right about that. Sometimes the most important thing you can do, after a door closes on you, is build a house steady enough that when someone finally knocks again, you are the one who gets to decide whether and how far to open it. I decided, I am still deciding, every single day. And I am, finally, at peace with whatever comes next.